Ladies and gentlemen, on her state visit to Washington, D.C., Her Excellency President Corazon C. Aquino does us great honor, not only as Filipino-Americans whose efforts helped to restore democratic rule in our homeland, but as a growing and cohesive voice in the affairs of mainstream America. President Aquino's visit also serves to remind us all that only by continuing to work together can we hope to see our fondest dream become reality. The dream of a Philippines and of a United States of America that are not only prosperous, strong, and compassionate, but united in their dedication to justice and its pursuit. Although some of us are now Americans, we can be intensely proud of our heritage and every bit as proud that our homeland now has a leader who represents the best of that heritage and the Filipino spirit. The best way we can demonstrate our pride is by redoubling our efforts and the cause we treasure. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to be a network of our next speaker, a person, a woman who has provided us leadership in the arena of political empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, Irene Natividad, Chair, National Women's Political Caucus Board.
Thank you very much. If I could have your attention, please, in between the photographs. It is so exciting for me personally to be here in the presence of President Aquino, who embodies for me a dream that I have tried to work towards, and I must say unsuccessfully, here in the United States. And that is a head of state who happens to be a woman. Ambassador Pelaez suggested a few weeks ago in another context that perhaps we should engage in the Philippines in some kind of a reverse aid and teach the United States how to elect a woman president. It is also exciting to be here to celebrate the presence of a unified Filipino-American political involvement as exemplified by all the organizations who are co-sponsors of this evening. As many of you know, unity is the first route to power. And political power we must have as Filipino-Americans, and it must come upon the heels of our successes in business, the professions, and education. The task before us is admittedly a very daunting one. I am sorry to say, could I have your attention, please? This won't be hard. I'm sorry to say that most Filipino Americans do not yet vote. Many of us still don't see a direct connection between politics and our daily lives. That in fact, a group of right now predominantly white males make decisions in our city councils, our state legislatures, and yes, Congress, about everything: the roads, education, taxes, equal access to employment, and yes, the responsiveness of Congress to queries from the Philippines for additional aid. All of that we can impact upon only if we realize that the best way we can affect the legislative process is by exercising our right to vote. We must remind other Filipino Americans that whether they are native-born Americans of Filipino parentage, or newly minted citizens, or recently arrived immigrants, this is our country now, and we ought to have a say in the way that it's run. If they do not vote, then we have not earned the right to complain. We cannot complain about the roads and the environment and the unresponsiveness of Congress to the Philippines if we do not cast that ballot. I have always found it ironic that in our home country of the Philippines, people wrap their arms around ballot boxes to protect that right, and in this country we take it for granted, let alone exercise it. Politics is largely influenced through numbers. And right now, because the majority of us have not yet voted in the past, the accurate power of this group has yet to be felt. At some level, for many of us, there remains a hesitancy between becoming full participants in the decision-making process. Part of the reason lies in the fact that it was only 39 years ago that Asian Americans not born in the United States were allowed to become full citizens. So in fact, even if many of us have been here a long time, we have not been allowed to participate in the public life of this country until 1950. So perhaps that has not imbued us with a sense of belonging. The other reason, perhaps, that we may not have been involved is that politics is an activity where verbal ability is highly prized. And I think for many Filipino Americans, there is a sense that language is a perceived problem. I say perceived because what we're really talking about is an accent. Well, let me tell you, S.B. Wu, a Chinese American, ran to become the Lieutenant Governor of Delaware, where there are no Chinese Americans, and he has a very heavy accent. So if he can do it, we can do it. Finally, politics works, as you know, on the basis of coalitions. And it is only recently that we have unified as a community. And it is only recently that we have begun to link arms with other Asian Americans, with other minority Americans, with other progressive organizations like the unions, like AFSCME, who is represented here tonight. This is a movement that we must continue, because frankly, alone, we are powerless. And divided, we are powerless. As my friend Lena Guerrero, who's a state legislator in Texas, once said, a power struggle among the powerless is senseless. But whatever the reason that we have not yet become politically involved, we must stop being silent. We must stop being quiet Americans. Furthermore, if we as Filipino Americans demand that this nation's leaders be held accountable, then we in turn must demand nothing less of ourselves. We owe it to this country, the United States of America, and to the Philippines, our home country, to become involved. And involvement doesn't just mean a fancy degree, a high-powered job, a good salary, and 30 credit cards. Involvement is a daily interest in the effort to make this country better, and indirectly our country, our home country of the Philippines. Politics at its most basic is a debate about the future. In our case, the future of this country, the future of the Philippines. To be political, one has to have a vision of that future and a vision of oneself as defining that future. The good news is that we live in a time when one can, in fact, take responsibility for one's life, unlike some of our mothers, fathers, and grandparents who may have dreamt our dreams, but could not act upon them because of the limitations of time and place. Well, today the barriers to our political participation are eroding. So it's back to basics. First, you have to want to change the world, then you have to find a way to change it. You may say it's not worth the effort, that one vote cannot possibly count. Well, let me tell you, one vote does count. A friend of mine who ran for state legislature in South Dakota lost by one vote, even after a recount. So trust me, it's worth the effort. The real pull of political life for me has been the ability to be a voice that articulates a vision, a value system, and then provokes a series of actions that hopefully affect people's lives for the better. I ask you to join me in affording that privilege to others. There is much to be done. We have an enormous amount of yet to be unleashed fervor, ability, and a sense of justice to be expressed and channeled. The time has come to listen to our inner voices, to synthesize that voice with the existing political structure, and then to act upon our beliefs. Well, let us begin. Thank you very much.
The gentleman I am going to introduce is a labor and political leader with big ideas and a big heart. He has used his influence both nationally and internationally. Locally, he has helped causes, big and small, by providing funding and manpower resources towards electing political, executive, and legislative leaders who are committed to social justice. He has exported that expertise and resources to his vast organization to the third world, particularly the Philippines. A known activist in other humanitarian causes, he has figured prominently in anti-apartheid activism and other global issues. He was one of the first big union leaders to speak and work against what was then a dictatorial regime in the Philippines. And this when it was not yet the fashion to do so. He worked closely with the great freedom fighter, founder and head of the Movement for a Free Philippines, now Minister of Foreign Affairs, Raul Manglapos. This gentleman epitomizes the American workforce and its collective bargaining powers. His negotiating skills make pure political theater. He is to the Americans what Lech Walesa is to Poland. It is therefore most fitting that he should be our keynote speaker because his is the basic, grassroots level, state-of-the-art approach to gaining, exercising, and dispensing political power. But perhaps more importantly, he has always worked for the same principles of equality, liberty, and democracy which our state visitor and honored guest restored to the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Gerald W. McEntee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been in the labor movement for about 31 years. I started when I was about 13 years of age. And I've been introduced by a lot of people and heard a lot of introductions, but by far, that's the best introduction I've ever had. And everything she said is true. But there's also another reason, and I don't know whether the folks here tonight, the other folks that are due to speak, would say this or mention it, but I want to make sure that it is mentioned. All during the struggle in the Philippines for democracy, all the time people hoping in the United States that it would come to pass, there indeed was a network of Filipino-Americans that worked so very hard for that day. Worked so very hard for that day of democracy. And as a matter of fact, the lady that introduced me, as far as I'm concerned, worked as hard as anybody in the United States and maybe as hard as anybody in the Philippines. And I thought for the longest period of time that AFSCME's office was either the seat of the revolution or the embassy of the Philippines. Matter of fact, the last 2 weeks I thought it was the embassy of the Philippines. But I would like if everybody would join me, and she worked so very hard in this effort, this magnificent, successful effort that we have here tonight. She worked so very hard. I will even say this to you, that she hasn't slept for about 2 days, has put it together, has helped organize it with many, many others, and we all indeed owe a debt of gratitude to Gloria Kawili. And Madam President, we love you being here. We most certainly will hate to see you go, but when you do, AFSCME will return to the union business and Gloria will get on with her work. Sisters and brothers, as one who has worked closely with Filipino-Americans and on behalf of the Philippines, I am indeed greatly honored in addressing you and in sharing the podium with an esteemed and most remarkable Chief of State, President Corazon Aquino. Working together, you led an entire nation from a starless night of tyranny back into the sunshine of freedom. As some, and I hope all of you know, I'm a trade unionist and proud to be so. But more importantly, and particularly in the context of President Aquino's state visit, I am, like all of you, an activist for civil and human rights, and equally proud of that. Wherever free unions exist, they give working men and women the power to improve their lives, not just in their jobs, but in their societies. And that free voice, speaking as it invariably does for human rights, is a dagger threat to despotism, and thus always among tyranny's first victims. Whenever that happens, the bell tolls for us all. And because of this, AFSCME, the union I represent, freely and openly supports our brothers and sisters wherever their rights are endangered by those who lust for power and privilege. We have actively reached out to Solidarność in Poland, to the emerging unions of South Africa, and to our counterparts in various Latin American nations. But rarely have our endeavors been as fruitful and as satisfying as in the Philippines. In the beginning, my executive assistant, Gloria, helped put AFSCME in touch with leaders of the Filipino-American community. She and Judge David Valderrama, who stands with us in our opposition to apartheid, found ways for AFSCME to work effectively with the then head of the movement for a free Philippines, Raul Manopolis, now Secretary of Foreign Affairs. We became strongly allied with the Trade Union Congress of the Philippines, helping to lay a foundation of freedom for public workers. And I'm happy to report that this freedom-building network remains in place and indeed in use. Since the election of President Aquino, public workers of the Philippines have found that instead of official hostility and repression, they can now count on friendship and cooperation in strengthening democratic government and in building their unions. During this long and sometimes arduous process, we came to a new and deeper relationship with the Filipino-American community on both coasts. We have shared facilities and resources. We have marched side by side in protesting the Marcos regime. We have lobbied together for federal assistance to speed the Philippines' recovery. And in the course of it all, I have witnessed this community grow in cohesiveness and strength, have seen your activists join the mainstream of and become a force in American political life. President Aquino, I salute all that you have done for your people and your nation, and for all your efforts in behalf of human rights and social justice. It is my hope that the union I represent, AFSCME, made some small contribution in the cause. But I am certain that Filipino Americans, not only those here tonight, but all across the United States, have made indeed a tremendous contribution. You have nourished the cause of democracy in the Philippines and have helped refresh and renew the democratic ideal of citizen activists here in America. And for one labor leader and for public sector workers in America, I say thank you for a job well done and Godspeed in all you do. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the first and only Filipino elected probate judge in the United States, the redoubtable, the Honorable Judge David M. Valderrama.
Thank you, Gloria. Somebody is very scared. Ambassador Pelaez. As we were escorting the president out of the of that room on my right, he kept going like this to me. He says, "Make it short," he says. Well, hopefully, Ninoy is looking down quite approvingly from above, and hopefully, with God's grace and company. Protocol dictates that a visiting chief of state is simply announced when he or she appears at official government functions. But I hope that Congressman Solers, Secretary Manglapus, Senator Alvarez, Ambassador Pelaez, and Ambassador Platt will agree with me that tradition requires that when a chief of state appears before a social, cultural, and political gathering honoring her, it is incumbent upon the person introducing her to pay tribute to her. I think that tradition applies in particular to our state visitor. She who has made yellow the color of courage, she who has become the beacon light of democracy, the symbol of liberty, and the embodiment of people power. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor, I have the privilege of introducing to you God's greatest gift to feminism, justice, and humanity, Her Excellency, the President of the Republic of the Philippines, Corazon C. Aquino.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well done. Well done. Well done.
Good evening, my very dear friends. 3 years ago, when I was here in Washington, I had a spectacular welcome, and Steve Solars was responsible, in a way, for initiating the $200 million honorarium. Don't worry, I'm not asking for the same honorarium. But it is certainly so good to be back. Just this afternoon, when Raul Manglapus and I were on our way to the airport, I was telling him, Raul, did you ever think, while we were living here in exile, that you would one day be coming back and be the Secretary of Foreign Affairs? If Senator Alvarez had been in the same car, I would have asked him the same thing. But of course, the biggest wonder of it all is that yours truly, a housewife, is now standing before you, the President of the Philippines. We have come a long way since those heady days when we celebrated here the victory of democracy. We had shown the world what Filipinos can do when they are united. The period that followed our very successful visit to the United States was followed by one of great uncertainty and terrible tragedies. There were repeated attempts by military renegades to destroy our young democracy and return us again to the shame of military rule. Again, it was Filipino unity that saved the day. With the country behind me, I faced off with the military rebels and, with the help of the people, defeated them. After that came the peace that our country so desperately needed, the peace in which to rebuild its economy and political institutions. We have been very successful in our efforts. From a negative growth of -4% in the last year of the dictatorship, the economy surged to a GNP of 6.7% without reneging in the smallest particular from any of its international financial obligations. The employment rate increased from 88.2% in 1986 to 90.4% in 1988. More importantly, the government was able to generate 2.3 million jobs since 1986. I have always said that a great part of what we have achieved, we owe to the unsung heroes of the Philippine Revolution, to the hundreds of thousands of overseas Filipinos whose dedication spreads the good word about the Philippines and whose earnings have supported our economy and brought in more financial resources into our country than almost any other sector of the economy. In the past 3 years, in fact, remittances were so substantial as to dwarf all foreign aid to the country. In recognition of your services, I issued Presidential Proclamation number 276 on June 21, 1988, declaring December of every year as the month for Filipinos overseas. This is a modest expression of our gratitude for your help. I know that earlier, Irene had told us that one should not be afraid if one has an accent. So I am emboldened to talk in Filipino so that our Filipino-Americans here can be reminded of how life is at home, and perhaps you will be close enough to the non-speaking Filipinos around you and to translate what I am going to say. Ako po ay lubos na nagagalak na makapiling kayo ngayong gabi. Alam ko na nakikiisa kayong lahat sa hangarin at mithiin ng sambayanang Pilipino. Bagamat malayo kayo sa inyong lupang tinubuan, marami sa inyo ang nagmamalasakit at patuloy na nagnanasang makatulong sa ating bayan. Nais kong pagtibayin ang makabayang hangaring ito sa pamamagitan ng isang paanyaya. Marami pa ang dapat gawin ng ating pamahalaan tungo sa pagpapaunlad at pagbabago sa pamumuhay ng ating mamamayan. Sa dakilang adhikain na ito, ang inyong tulong ay lubos na kailangan. Balikan po ninyo ang mga lalawigan o nayon na inyong pinanggalingan. Marahil may mga kamag-anak o kaibigan kayo na nangangailangan ng tulong sa puhunan sa kanilang mga hanap buhay o paghahanap ng magtatangkilik ng ating mga katutubong produkto. Ito po ay isang magandang pagsimula. Habang kayo ay narito, makilahok sa pagpapalago ng ating itinatag na Philippine Fund bilang isang paraang pangpuhunan na makakatulong sa ating kabuhayan. Pagsikapin po ninyong anyayahan rin ang mga banyaga na mamamahagi dito ng kanilang puhunan upang lalong pasaganain ang ating pambansang ekonomiya at magdulot ng maraming hanapbuhay. Sa inyong tulong, ang ating mga kababayang kapuspalad ang mabibigyan ng pag-asang guminhawa. Through a program which we aptly call the Lingkod sa Kapwa Pilipino, we seek to establish a network of support between Filipinos overseas and Filipinos at home. I have tasked the Manila-based Commission on Filipinos Overseas, an agency under the Office of the President, to serve as the primary conduit between interested Filipino associations here and local beneficiaries in the Philippines. Tayong mga Pilipino ay nakikilala sa sipag at talino. Ngunit marami ang nakakapuna sa ating hidwaon o di pagkakasundo sa ating mga gawain. Marami rin na nagtatanong ng ating kakayahan bilang isang lahi. Tuwirin po natin ang hindi mabuting pagkakilala sa ating mga Pilipino. Tayo po ay magkaisa. Gamitin natin ang ating sipag at talino upang tayo ay magkaroon ng isang hangarin at isang tinig dito sa Amerika upang mapabilang na malakas na puwersa sa larangan ng politika at ekonomiya. Ako ay team na nagnanasang na ang lahat ng ating mga pagsisikap ay magdudulot ng makabuluhang halaga sa ating kinabukasan. Ang minimithi nating kasaganahan ay matatamo rin natin. Sa araw na iyon, hindi na siguro nararapat na malayo pa tayo sa ating bayan at ating mga minamahal upang makapaghanap ng magandang kabuhayan. Iyan ang diwa ng aking kasalukuyang paglalakbay. Para sa ating bayan, tayo ay magkaisa at magtulungan. One of the main reasons for my coming to the United States this time is to promote trade and investments. It is so very important for us to be able to encourage foreign investors to come to our country. I have just come from Canada, and I also urged the Filipino-Canadians and also the other Canadians to come to the Philippines and invest in our country. And the immediate response was they will be sending a business delegation in February. And I told them that since this is the first important delegation coming from Canada, I was inviting them to a lunch or dinner, which I will personally host in Malacanang. I don't normally invite all investors to come and dine with me. But since I was really so overwhelmed by the instant response of the Canadians, and so I extended this invitation, and I know that they will be coming, and it will be very profitable not only for the Filipinos, but more particularly for the businessmen who are coming to our country. I have been very fortunate to have so many friends, and especially the friends here in the United States. What can I say except I thank God Almighty for all the many blessings that He has given me, and for having given me the great opportunity to lead our country from a dictatorship to a democracy. I appeal to each and every one of our Filipino-Americans to unite, to help each other, and always to pray for one another. Because through all of my difficulties in life, somehow, because of so many people praying for me, things became that much less difficult. I cannot say they became easy, but they became much less difficult. And so here we are today, telling you what we have accomplished during the 3.5 years of my administration. I hope you will all try and visit the Philippines soon, and I think it will be good for you to be reunited with your relatives and friends there. Again, many thanks. Maraming salamat po. At inaasahan ko na magkikita tayong muli sa lalong madaling panahon. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Ladies and gentlemen, the National President of the Filipino-American Political Association, Publisher and Editor-in-Chief, Philippine News, Mr. Alex A. Esclamado.
Steve. Mrs. President, distinguished guests at the head table, I'm the guy who has the thickest accent. I have to give a special recognition to our representative in the House, in Congress, because we have none, Stephen Solars. As you know, Steve has made it possible for a dream to come true, and that is the Multilateral Assistance Initiative. Originally envisioned as a dream of $10 billion for 5 years, now turning out to be $14.5 billion. Mrs. President, when Gloria and her committee started to prepare this event, they started to get into trouble 2 weeks ago because the seats were sold out right away and there was no bigger room to accommodate. We must have turned away about 1,000 requests. That is a manifestation of the love, the respect, and the hope that Filipino-Americans have pinned on you to bring the Filipino people to the much-deserved future, the upliftment of their impoverished state. We would like to have you leave this place with some souvenirs. First of all, I would like to call upon Gloria, the ambassador, and Mr. Pideri, Mr. Asercion, to please present just a humble plaque of our expression of gratitude for honoring us today. These people really work so hard. I don't know if they have slept for 2 days. One thing about your ambassador here, Mrs. President, I have not seen a man who looks so young at 74. He does not want his age to... I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador. Okay.
Thank you, Alex. Mrs. President, like Clint Eastwood says, you made our day. On behalf of the three leadership in the community, the Filipino-American Political Association, the Philippine Heritage Federation, the Philippine Independence Day Committee, would like to present you an achievement award presented to Her Excellency Corazon Aquino, President, Republic of the Philippines, on November 8, 1980. Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, and I'll read the inscription: in recognition of her courageous role in restoring freedom and democracy to the Filipino people, and for inspiring and dynamic leadership as President of the Republic of the Philippines.
Mrs. President, you know the Filipino community has become the largest Asian group in California, the fastest growing in the United States, second only to the Mexicans in terms of numbers. But what is important is that there are more Filipinos becoming American citizens every year than any other group, immigrant group to this country, which means political power. And as a souvenir, we made no less than the Undersecretary of Commerce who handles the census to prepare for you a sort of a demographic study of the Filipino population. Mr. Mark Plank. And finally, Mrs. President, when you visited us in San Francisco 3 years ago, the national unification movement was only a dream, and the only two resolutions we passed in our unity conference was, and you had a copy of it, was the lobby for a multilateral assistance initiative, which is now becoming a reality. Now tonight, we would like to make this evening more meaningful by launching what we call the People Power for Progress program, or People-to-People program. What it is this simply. There are 4,000 Filipinos throughout the country, and many say this is a manifestation of our disunity. Wrong. This is a manifestation of our unity. We want now to confederate these 4,000 organizations into 73 provincial organizations. And each of these provincial organizations would link up with their respective provinces, and these provincial confederations will provide the capital for the generation of rural projects, economic projects, in partnership with the non-governmental institutions as well as the people in their own barrios and towns. By a miracle, a man named Dr. Saucelo, a part in South Bend, Indiana, wrote something about what our national movement wanted to do. I would like to ask Bart to come forward here. Bart, where are you? He wrote something like People Power for Progress, which we inserted in your program tonight. We are going to amend this in a national convention of Filipinos to be held next year in Washington, D.C., where we expect 5,000 people to attend. But for a starter, read it. The principle is simple. If Filipinos in America do not support the Philippines, we have no right to ask any foreigners to support the Philippines. Bart, where are you? From Gary, Indiana.